Every empire tells a story about honesty, merit, and freedom. But beneath every flag, every constitution, and every promise of equality lies a hidden ledger, a record of debts and favors, a network of families and financiers who turned trust into a weapon and money into power. While nations fought wars and wrote history in blood, another history was written in ink, on parchment, in contracts, in quiet boardrooms where fortunes were forged long before the public ever saw them. They were merchants, bankers, and visionaries, but they were also architects, not of buildings, but of systems. Systems designed to outlive presidents, revolutions, and even nations themselves. This is not the story of how America built Wall Street. It's the story of how Wall Street built America. A tale of families whose influence spanned centuries, of laws shaped behind closed doors, of trust weaponized and finance transformed into empire. You are about to enter the unseen world of capital, where names are legacies and numbers decide nations. This is the hidden origins of Wall Street tycoons. Every empire begins with an illusion. The illusion of security, of honesty, of trust. And in early America, long before Wall Street's flashing tickers and marble towers, trust was the only real currency that existed. Before dollars ruled the world, there were names. Names like Brown, Astor, and Girard, merchant families who carried the weight of their reputation in every letter they signed and every loan they offered. Their fortunes were not built on factories or oil fields, but on confidence. Confidence that a promise written on parchment would be honored in gold. In the late 1700s, America was young, fragile, and broke. The Revolution had left the colonies in debt, banks were scarce, and paper money was distrusted. Trade still flowed through Old World ports, London, Amsterdam, and Hamburg, where European banking families decided who received credit and who starved for it. But a few American merchants learned the secret. Trust could be manufactured. You didn't need royal blood, only reliability, discipline, and family. Brothers ran offices across oceans, sons married into rival houses. Letters of credit moved faster than gold, because faith in a name weighed more than metal in a ship's hold. This was the birth of financial power, when relationships became currency. A merchant's word could move mountains of trade, while governments still struggled to print stable paper. Credit replaced coin, and trust became leverage. And so, beneath the flags and ideals of a new republic, another nation was quietly forming, a nation of ledgers and promises, controlled not by presidents, but by partners and families who understood that whoever controlled trust, controlled the future. They didn't build America's banks yet. They built something more powerful. They built belief. By the dawn of the 19th century, America's young economy had grown teeth. Ships carried cotton, tobacco, and fur to Europe. Gold and goods returned. But behind every deal, every loan, and every new venture, one truth remained constant. Business was personal, and the greatest currency was still the family name. In an era before corporate charters and regulation, your signature wasn't just a formality. It was your reputation, your fortune, and sometimes your bloodline's survival. The early financial dynasties understood this better than anyone. They built empires not just through money, but through marriage, loyalty, and secrecy. The Brown family of Providence mastered the art of transatlantic credit. The Astors turned fur into fortune, and then fortune into real estate. Stephen Girard, once a sailor, became one of the richest men in America by financing the government itself when no bank dared to. But none of them did it alone. Each created webs of connection, in-laws, cousins, trusted clerks, a network that stretched from counting houses in Manhattan to drawing rooms in London. These weren't random alliances. They were financial marriages, literal unions designed to merge resources, information, and power. A daughter's dowry could buy a ship. A son's partnership could open a credit line across the Atlantic. The ledger and the family tree grew side by side. And this, more than any single invention, was the foundation of Wall Street. Not skyscrapers or stock tickers, but the trust of a few powerful names. They could lend when others panicked. They could buy when markets burned. And through crisis after crisis, their reputation became a fortress. In a country that worshipped individual success, its greatest fortunes were quietly collective, bound not by law, but by blood. Because before Wall Street was ever a street, it was a family business. By the mid-19th century, family connections alone were no longer enough. America was expanding faster than any private network could manage. Railroads stretched across continents, factories demanded credit, and governments borrowed sums once unimaginable. The old families faced a new challenge: to turn personal trust into institutional power. That transformation began with a simple realization: a name can die, but a company can live forever. So they built machines, legal, financial, and corporate, designed not to end with a man's life, but to preserve his influence long after he was gone. The first were the private banks and trust companies. They didn't just hold deposits, they managed estates, merged firms, and quietly took ownership of assets placed in their care. What began as protection for widows and heirs evolved into a mechanism for control. A single trust could hold shares in dozens of enterprises, all guided by one hand, unseen but unmistakable. Then came the holding company, a structure that allowed one corporation to own another, layer upon layer. Power was multiplied through complexity. Responsibility dissolved through paperwork. The public saw competition. Insiders saw coordination. These machines of money didn't need soldiers or kings. They needed lawyers. Every charter, every clause, every tax exemption was a new gear in the engine of quiet domination. When laws tried to limit monopolies, they adapted. When markets crashed, they restructured. The institution itself became immortal, and the result was profound. For the first time in history, wealth no longer needed a face. A man could die, yet his fortune would continue to act, to invest, to expand, to rule, through a web of signatures and seals. The age of family power had given birth to something even greater: the age of the corporation. From that moment on, power was no longer visible. It was written in contracts, hidden in trusts, and buried inside the machines of money. Power without protection is temporary. The early tycoons learned that lesson quickly. They had money, they had institutions, but they still faced a threat more dangerous than any rival: the law itself. So they did what every empire eventually does. They learned to write the rules. From the late 1800s onward, the lines between finance and government began to blur. Bankers became advisors, industrialists became senators, and politicians learned that their campaigns, their policies, even their survival, depended on the same families who financed the nation's growth. Laws are not born neutral. They are negotiated. Behind every new regulation, every tax clause, every bank act, there were meetings in quiet rooms where favors were exchanged and promises recorded off the books. The tycoons understood something essential. Markets could fail, but a well-placed clause in the law could last for generations. They funded research, founded newspapers, sponsored universities, and wrote the very textbooks that defined capitalism itself. They called it patriotism, progress, or efficiency. But the result was always the same: power institutionalized. During crises, their influence showed its true strength. When markets trembled, politicians called them in for rescue. When banks collapsed, they were asked to stabilize the system they had helped design. And when reformers tried to curb their power, they funded both sides of the debate until the laws softened into compromise. A senator might serve 6 years. A banker's network could last a century. The laws they shaped would govern people who hadn't even been born yet. By the early 20th century, these men had created what journalists quietly called a state within a state, a web of influence where private interests directed public policy. Not through coups or revolutions, but through handshakes, letters, and campaign donations. And so, the system hardened around them, not by accident, but by design. The tycoons no longer just played the game. They became the referees. By the dawn of the 20th century, one name stood above all others in American finance: Morgan. Not a company, not even a single man, but a dynasty, a network of partners, heirs, and allies who quietly became the spine of the U.S. economy. J.P. Morgan was not born a legend. He was born into a system, one already built by generations of merchants and bankers who understood the art of confidence. He simply perfected it. While others chased fortune through speculation, Morgan pursued something far more valuable: control. He believed stability was the ultimate form of profit, and when chaos came, it was Morgan who decided what survived. In the panic of 1907, when banks failed and fear ruled the streets, the government was paralyzed. There was no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no one to stop the bleeding. So Morgan gathered the nation's top bankers in his library, locked the doors, and refused to let anyone leave until a plan was made. That night, a single man organized a private rescue of the American financial system. The press called him a hero. But behind the praise lay a deeper truth. Morgan didn't save the market out of charity. He saved it because the market was his. The firms he rescued became loyal clients. The politicians he reassured became permanent allies. From that night onward, Wall Street understood. Real power didn't sit in Congress. It sat in the library of a man who could summon billions with a telegram. When Morgan died in 1913, his funeral drew princes and presidents. Yet what he built didn't die with him. The House of Morgan had become more than a firm. It was an organism, part bank, part shadow government, part guardian of order. Even the creation of the Federal Reserve that same year echoed his philosophy: private interests guiding public stability. And so, through every boom and crash that followed, the fingerprints of the Morgan Empire remained. Whenever the system trembled, their influence appeared, quiet, measured, and decisive. They were not merely participants in American capitalism, they were its architects. The faces have changed, but the game remains the same. The tycoons of the 21st century wear hoodies instead of top hats, speak on panels instead of in drawing rooms, and manage algorithms instead of ledgers. But beneath the surface, the architecture of power is familiar: networks, control, and access. The heirs of Wall Street's original families no longer need to own banks outright. They own what controls the banks, the flows of capital. Today, power sits inside hedge funds, private equity firms, and family offices that operate quietly, invisibly, and globally. These are the new houses of finance. Their walls are digital, their reach is unlimited. A single hedge fund can move more money in a day than the Morgans moved in a month. A family office can buy skyscrapers, media companies, or nations' debts without filing a single public report. And while politicians debate budgets, these institutions shift billions across continents with a click. Modern tycoons have learned the same lessons their predecessors mastered a century ago. Control the information, influence the rules, and the profits will follow. They fund campaigns, shape policies, and endow universities that teach their worldview as economic truth. They call it innovation, but history recognizes it as continuity. Where J.P. Morgan once gathered bankers in a wood-paneled room, today's financial power meets in private forums and encrypted calls. Their concern is no longer national stability, it's global positioning, and their loyalty belongs not to a flag, but to returns. What once was the House of Morgan is now an ecosystem of silent empires: Vanguard, BlackRock, KKR, Bridgewater, each a node in a web so vast that even governments depend on their capital to function. These are the new tycoons, the invisible monarchs of money. They don't need to rule openly. They rule through ownership, through percentages, through influence, through the quiet certainty that when the world trembles, it's their balance sheets that decide who falls and who survives. The stage has changed. The tools are faster, but the story is the same. Capital never dies. It simply finds a new name. Across 2 centuries, the stage has changed. The tools have evolved, but the melody of money has remained the same. From the merchant families who traded trust across oceans, to the bankers who built empires from ledgers, to the hedge fund titans who moved trillions with keystrokes, the pursuit has never been wealth alone. It has always been continuity. The lesson history whispers is not about greed or corruption or even brilliance. It is about structure. Those who endure do not merely earn, they engineer. They design systems that protect their fortunes from time, chance, and law. When wars erase nations, their wealth survives. When currencies die, their assets remain. When governments fall, their companies live on, untouched behind layers of charters and trusts. The true secret of power is not visibility, but endurance. The names change, but the mechanisms persist. Influence written into policy, ownership buried inside institutions, and laws crafted to look impartial while serving the few who understood them best. And yet, hidden in all this manipulation lies another truth. Every age believes its system is permanent, that its markets are fair, its banks are stable, and its rules unbreakable. But history has never kept that promise. Every empire of money eventually learns that stability is an illusion purchased by confidence, and confidence is the most fragile asset of all. For the individual, the lesson is not despair, but awareness. Those who see the pattern early can protect themselves. They can move when others freeze, question when others obey, and adapt when systems shift. Because the same history that empowered the few also leaves clues for the rest. Power is not a mystery. It is a cycle, and understanding it is the first step to surviving it. So the next time you hear of a market crash, a bailout, or a billionaire's rise, remember, this isn't a new story. It's the oldest one we tell, because wealth does not vanish. It migrates from the hands that trust to the minds that understand. And that has always been the real capital of history. We began with families and promises, with gold coins, letters, and handshakes. We end with algorithms and screens. But the story has never changed. It has only evolved. From the counting houses of Providence to the skyscrapers of Manhattan, from the House of Morgan to the silent empires of global finance, the lesson remains eternal. Power is patient, wealth is adaptable, and the game never ends. Every generation believes it understands money. Few ever understand power. Those who do write the rules. Those who don't live by them. History doesn't repeat. It compounds. And in that compounding, the few who truly listen find their advantage. This is the legacy of capital. This is the Capital Historian. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more hidden truths behind money, power, and history, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with someone who needs to understand how the world of capital truly works. Because the more we understand history, the better we play the game it created.